They say you shouldn't make life-altering decisions when you're at your lowest, but sometimes the lowest point is the only place where you feel like you have to move or you'll drown. I found myself in a position where I was holding a man's entire recovery, his sobriety, and his will to live in the palm of my hands. And the worst part? I didn't want to be holding it. I wanted to drop it and run as far away as I could. But how do you walk away from someone who tells you that you're the only reason they're still breathing? How do you tell a man who's 2 months sober that the loyalty he's praising you for is actually just a mask for the fact that you've been mourning a relationship that never even truly started? I was trapped in a cage made of his gratitude, and every time he called me a pet name, it felt like another bar was being welded shut. This is the story of how I became a savior I never asked to be, and the crushing guilt of realizing that being a good person might actually be destroying both of us. To understand how I ended up here, suffocating under the weight of a perfect guy's expectations, you have to understand where I was coming from. For months, I had been trapped in a cycle that I can only describe as a toxic, soul-sucking situationship. I'm 25 now, and I'd like to think I'm smart, but back then, I was an idiot for love. Or maybe not even love, I was an idiot for the idea of being wanted. My previous friend, if you can even call him that, treated me like an object. It wasn't just that it was messy, it was painful. I spent every night wondering why I wasn't enough, why he only saw me as a vessel for his own kinks, things I absolutely hated but felt pressured to endure just to keep him around. By the time December rolled around, I was a shell of a person. My self-esteem wasn't just low, it was non-existent. When I finally ended things with him, the silence was deafening. I thought I needed space, but instead I did exactly what every therapist tells you not to do. I sought out a distraction. I fell into the arms of another guy almost immediately. Let's call him Leo. Leo was 22, younger than me, and at first he was everything the other guy wasn't. He was kind, he was attentive, he listened, or at least that's what I told myself. We met online, and in the digital world, it's so easy to build a pedestal for someone and then climb right up onto it. Leo fell hard. I mean, he fell at terminal velocity. Within what felt like days, he was treating me like the center of his universe. Part of me, the broken, exhausted part, was absolutely terrified by the speed of it all. It was like watching a train head toward a wall and knowing you're on the tracks, but you stay there because the train looks so shiny and hopeful. But another part of me, the part that had been starved for affection for so long, felt good. It felt amazing to be valued. For once, I wasn't being used for some dark fantasy. I was being treated like a person. Or so I thought. We spent hours texting, sharing memes, talking about our lives. But because it was online, there was this safety net of distance. I could be whoever I wanted to be, and he could be the hero I needed. But things moved uncomfortably fast. Before I could even catch my breath, we were in this relationship that didn't have a title, but carried the weight of a marriage. He was telling me things I wasn't ready to hear, and I was nodding along, gaslighting myself into believing that this was what healing looked like. I told myself that the discomfort I felt was just fear of intimacy because of my ex. I told myself that the lack of a spark didn't matter because he was a nice guy. But then came the phone call. Up until that point, we had lived in the world of text bubbles and edited photos. But then we decided to actually talk, voice to voice. I remember sitting on my bed, the phone heavy in my hand, my heart racing for all the wrong reasons. The moment he picked up, the illusion shattered. You know that feeling when you meet someone and you just realize in your soul that there's nothing there? It was like trying to start a fire with wet matches. The silence on the line was agonizing. It wasn't a comfortable, we don't need words kind of silence. It was a, what on earth do I say to this person kind of silence. I realised in those 40 minutes that we had zero chemistry. His humour didn't click with mine. The way he talked about things, the way he viewed the world, it just didn't vibe. Personality-wise, he just wasn't my type. He was sweet, yes, but he was sweet in a way that made me feel like I was talking to a child or a stranger I had nothing in common with. The idea of spending my life with him, of having to fill those silences for the next 50 years, made me physically shudder. But did I end it then? No. I was too weak. I was too afraid to be alone again, and I didn't want to be the bad guy who rejected a nice guy for something as shallow as chemistry. So, I started pretending. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I sent heart emojis I didn't feel. And as the weeks went by, the icks started piling up. Little things he'd say, the way he'd cling to me through the screen. It felt like he was trying to wrap me in plastic wrap. I was suffocating, but I kept smiling for the camera. Then, February hit, and everything changed. The nice guy facade started to crack, not because he was mean, but because he was falling apart. Leo started pulling away. Our interactions became spotty, erratic. He finally admitted to me that he was going through a horrific time. He was an alcoholic, and he was spiraling. It wasn't just a few bad nights. It was a total collapse. He told me he was going to the hospital. He needed to get his life on track, and he needed to do it without the pressure of us. Part of me, the selfish part, felt a massive wave of relief. This was it. This was the natural end. I could be the supportive friend while he went away to get help, and then we could just fade out. I wasn't planning on ending things because he was sick. I had wanted out long before the hospital was even a thought. But the timing was a curse. If I left him while he was in rehab, I'd be the monster who abandoned a man at his lowest. So I waited. We didn't talk for a month. A whole month of silence. In that month, I breathed. I felt like I had my life back. I worried about him, truly, but it was the worry you feel for a distant cousin, not a partner. I was proud of him for seeking help, but I was even happier for the silence. But the silence didn't last. A few days ago, I sent him a message. It was a "hope you're doing okay" text, entirely platonic. I wanted to be a good human being. I wanted to show him that someone cared about his progress without it being romantic. He replied almost instantly. He told me he was 2 months sober. He was doing so well. My heart soared for him, truly. But then, he said the words that turned my stomach into lead. He told me that he'd never had a woman wait for him like I did. He told me that my loyalty was what kept him going. He told me that knowing I was still there, waiting on the other side of his recovery, gave him the strength to stay sober. And then, he called me babe. He used the romantic pet names again. He spoke as if the last month of silence was just a temporary pause in our epic love story, rather than the beginning of the end. And now, I'm sitting here, staring at my phone, feeling like I'm holding a ticking time bomb. He thinks I'm his anchor. He thinks I'm the reward for his sobriety. But I don't have those feelings anymore. They evaporated months ago. I feel like I'm lying every time I reply to him, but I'm terrified that if I tell him the truth, that I don't want to be with him, that I haven't for a long time, he'll spiral. I'm scared I'll be the reason he picks up a bottle again. I'm scared that his 2 months of hard work will vanish because I couldn't keep up the act. I feel extremely suffocated. And the worst part is, he's being so nice. How do you break the heart of a man who is finally starting to heal? The weight of that word, loyal, was what finally broke me. It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a pair of handcuffs clicking shut. When he messaged me saying he'd never had a woman wait for him like I did, my heart didn't swell with pride. It sank into the pit of my stomach. I realized right then that in his mind, I wasn't just a person he was dating. I was a prize he had earned by surviving his own demons. I was the light at the end of his tunnel, the guardian angel who stayed in the shadows while he fought his way out of the hospital and back into the light. But the truth was so much uglier than that. I hadn't been waiting for him. I had been enjoying the silence. I had been taking deep breaths of fresh air, finally free from the performative, happily ever after I'd been forcing myself to live through. Looking back at those weeks in February, before he went to the hospital, I can see how much I was gaslighting myself. I had come out of that toxic disaster with my ex, a man who treated me like a disposable object, and I was so desperate to feel safe that I ignored every red flag my intuition was waving in my face. Leo was safe. He was nice. He was kind. But nice isn't a personality, and kind doesn't create chemistry. I remember sitting on my couch, looking at my phone as a text from him would pop up, and feeling this sudden, sharp pang of irritation. It's that ick feeling that people talk about, the one you can't quite explain but you feel in your very bones. It was the little things. The way he would use these overly sentimental, almost cinematic pet names after knowing me for such a short time. The way his humour felt forced, like he was reading from a script of what he thought a perfect boyfriend should say. He'd make these jokes that just didn't land, and I'd find myself typing ha 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 while my face remained completely stone cold. I was a professional actress in a movie I never auditioned for, and because it was an online relationship, it was so much easier to maintain the facade. I didn't have to hide the look on my face when he said something cringeworthy. I just had to send the right emoji. But the phone call, that one disastrous phone call, had been the turning point. Hearing his voice, hearing the dead air between us that I desperately tried to fill with nervous chatter, made me realize that there was nothing there. No spark, no connection, just two people clinging to the idea of each other because they were both afraid of being alone. Then the alcohol started to take over. I watched from behind a screen as he began to spiral. He'd send messages that didn't make sense, or he'd go dark for hours, only to return with apologies that felt heavy with shame. He told me he was going through a rough time, but as someone who had just escaped a toxic situation, my first instinct wasn't to dive in and save him, it was to protect myself. I felt myself retreating. I started acting more like a friend than a girlfriend. I stopped using the romantic language. I stopped the late-night flirty texts. I was trying to build a bridge back to platonic land, hoping he would follow me there. But then came the hospital. When he told me he was checking in, that he needed to get his life on track and quit the drinking, I felt a strange mix of genuine concern and profound relief. It was like the universe had given me a get-out-of-jail-free card. He needed to focus on himself. He needed to be sober. And for a month, we didn't speak. In that month, I started to find myself again. I didn't have to check my phone every 5 minutes. I didn't have to pretend to laugh at jokes I didn't find funny. I was mourning the relationship, sure, but it was a quiet, peaceful mourning. I thought, okay, this is it. We'll both move on. He'll get healthy, and I'll be free. But my conscience wouldn't let me just vanish. I'm a good person, or at least I try to be. I kept thinking about how alone he must feel, how hard it is to battle an addiction like that. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to show him that people cared about him as a human being, not just as a romantic interest. So I sent that text, just a simple, friendly check-in. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was being a good friend. Instead, I was unknowingly pouring gasoline on a fire I thought had gone out. His response was a tidal wave. He wasn't just doing okay, he was 2 months sober. He was ecstatic, and in his mind, my text wasn't a friendly check-in. It was a declaration of undying love. It was proof that I had waited for him. He started calling me those romantic names again, and every babe and sweetheart felt like a physical blow. He told me he loved me. He told me that I was the reason he was still going. Can you imagine the pressure of that? Knowing that if you say, "I don't feel the same way," you might be the reason a man loses his sobriety? He's survived his parents. He's survived bad partners. He's survived the bottle. And now he's holding on to me like I'm the only thing keeping him from falling back into the abyss. He literally told me he loved me a month into our friendship. A month! Who does that? It's classic love bombing, even if he doesn't realize he's doing it. He's in love with the idea of me, the idea of the loyal woman who stood by him through his darkest hour. But I wasn't standing by him. I was moving on. I was already gone. Now I feel like I'm suffocating. Every time my phone buzzes, my stomach ties itself in knots. I'm living a lie, but the stakes of the truth feel life-threatening. If I tell him now, today, that I want to end the romance, what happens to his 2 months of sobriety? Does he go straight to the liquor store? Does he tell himself that even the loyal one didn't want him? I don't want to bring him more pain. God knows he's had enough of it. But how long can I keep this up? How long can I pretend to be the woman he thinks I am before I completely lose who I actually am? I feel like a hostage to his progress. It's the ultimate nice guy trap. He hasn't done anything wrong. In fact, he's doing everything right. He's getting sober. He's being sweet. He's being caring. But I'm miserable. I'm cringing at every interaction. I'm looking for excuses to not pick up the phone. I want to break up, but we were never even officially together. How do you break up with someone who thinks you're his savior? How do you tell a man who is finally finding his footing that you're about to pull the rug out from under him? I'm terrified of the fallout, but I'm even more terrified of the alternative. A lifetime of pretending to love someone who gives me the ick. Every time my phone vibrates on the nightstand, my heart does this sickening little jolt. It's not the spark of excitement you're supposed to feel when the person you're dating reaches out. It's a cold, heavy thud of dread. It's the sound of another brick being added to the wall of a prison I built for myself out of good intentions and a desperate need to be liked. I look at the screen and there it is. Another long, flowery paragraph about how I'm his rock, his angel, the only good thing in his life. I stare at the blue light until it dims, and I feel like I'm looking at a script for a play I'm too exhausted to perform in anymore. I find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering how I got here. I just got out of a situation that was objectively a nightmare. A guy who used me, who didn't care about my boundaries, who made me feel like I was nothing more than a tool for his own satisfaction. You'd think that after that, I'd be smarter. You'd think I'd take a second to breathe, to find out who I was before trying to be who someone else needed. But no, I jumped. I jumped right into the arms of a nice guy, because I thought nice was the antidote to the poison I'd been drinking. I didn't realize that you can drown in the glass of clean water just as easily as you can in a pool of toxic waste if you're forced to stay under the surface. The ick is such a strange, visceral thing. People joke about it online, but when you're living it, it's agonizing. It's not that he's doing anything wrong in a traditional sense. He's polite, he's supportive. But every time he tries to be funny, I feel this wave of secondhand embarrassment that makes me want to crawl out of my skin. Our humor just doesn't align. I like sharp, witty, maybe a little bit cynical banter. He's earnest. He's so painfully earnest that it feels like eating a bowl of pure sugar. It's sweet for a second, but eventually it just makes you feel sick. He sends me these memes that are 5 years out of date, or he'll make these dad jokes that aren't even clever, they're just there. And I have to type LOL or OMG, stop. I'm lying with every keystroke, but it's more than just the jokes. It's the way he looks at me, even through a screen. He sees this version of me that isn't real. He sees a saint. He sees a woman who waited for him while he was in the hospital, a woman of loyalty and grace. But I wasn't being loyal. I was being distant. I was being a friend. I was trying to create space so I could eventually leave without causing a scene, but in his mind, because he was in such a dark place, he interpreted my distance as patience and my generic check-ins as undying support. He's written a narrative where I'm the heroine who saved him, and now I'm expected to live up to that role for the rest of my life. And the pressure of his sobriety. God, the pressure is immense. He's 2 months sober. That's incredible. I am genuinely 100% proud of him for that. I've seen what alcohol can do to people, and the fact that he's fighting back is amazing. But he's making me the reason for it. He told me that when he was in the hospital, the thought of me was the only thing that kept him from giving up. He told me that knowing I was there for him made the cravings manageable. That is a terrifying thing to hear. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a sponsor. I'm just a 25-year-old girl who's still trying to figure out why I keep picking the wrong men. I shouldn't be the cornerstone of someone else's mental health. If I'm the reason he's sober, what happens when I'm gone? What happens when I finally work up the courage to say, hey, I don't think we have chemistry and I don't want to be in a relationship? Does he go straight back to the bottle? Does he tell himself that his angel was just another lie? The guilt is like a physical weight on my chest. It feels like I'm holding a fragile glass ornament, and if I move even an inch, it'll shatter into a million pieces, and I'll be the one with the blood on my hands. I feel so suffocated by his expectations. He calls me babe, and I want to scream. He talks about our future, and I feel like I'm looking at a prison sentence. He literally told me he loved me after a month. At the time, I was so caught up in the novelty of being loved that I didn't see it for what it was. A red flag the size of a billboard. It wasn't love. It was a projection. He didn't love me. He didn't even know me. We had never even met in person. He loved the idea of a girl who would listen to him and be nice to him. He was a starving man, and I was the first meal he saw. Of course, he loved me, but I'm not a meal. I'm a person, and I'm a person who is currently miserable. I've started to realize that by waiting and being nice, I might actually be doing more damage in the long run. Every day that I pretend to feel something I don't, I'm digging the hole deeper. I'm letting him get more attached. I'm letting him build more of his recovery on the foundation of a relationship that doesn't actually exist. It's like I'm building a house on sand, and I'm just waiting for the tide to come in and wash it all away. I know I have to tell him. I know I have to end the romance. But how? How do you break up with someone who has gone through so much pain? He's told me about his parents, about how they let him down. He's told me about his exes, about how they cheated and lied. He's told me about the substances he's used to numb the pain of growing up too fast. He's had a hard life. A really, really hard life. And I don't want to be another person who hurts him. I don't want to be another bad memory in his collection. But I also can't keep living this lie. I feel like I'm disappearing. My own needs, my own desires, my own type. None of it matters because I'm too busy being the supportive partner for someone I don't even like that much. The ick has turned into a full-blown stay away from me. It's not even his fault, which makes the guilt even worse. He's being perfect. He's doing everything a good boyfriend is supposed to do. He sends good morning texts. He asks how my day was. He tells me I'm beautiful. And every time he does, I feel this desperate urge to throw my phone across the room. It's like he's trying to love me into a corner. I feel like I'm being smothered with a very soft, very warm, very expensive blanket. It's nice, but I can't breathe. I keep waiting for the right time. But when is the right time to tell a recovering alcoholic that the girl he thinks is his soulmate is actually just pretending? Is it after 3 months of sobriety? 6? A year? Is there ever a time when the news won't be devastating? I'm starting to realize that there is no right time. There's only now and later. And the longer I wait for later, the more I'm deceiving him. But now feels so cruel. He just got back from the hospital. He's finally feeling good about himself. How can I be the one to ruin that? The blue light of my phone screen felt like a spotlight on my own hypocrisy. Every time I typed back a "thank you" or a "love you too," I felt a piece of my integrity chip away. It's funny how we think being nice is the same thing as being good. I thought I was being a good person by not breaking his heart while he was in a hospital bed. I thought I was being a good person by waiting for him to get his life together. But as I sat there in the dark, watching his 3 dots bounce on the screen as he typed yet another essay about how much he missed me, I realized that I wasn't being good at all. I was being a coward. I was holding him hostage in a relationship that only one of us was actually in. The thing about online relationships is that they allow you to curate a version of yourself that is perfect. You can edit your words, you can choose the best photos, and you can hide the parts of your life that don't fit the narrative. But you can't edit your soul. You can't filter the ick away once it starts to seep into everything. And for me, the ick wasn't just about his jokes or his pet names anymore. It was about the way he viewed me. He didn't see me. He saw a concept. He saw the girl who stayed. He saw a trophy for his sobriety. And every time he praised my loyalty, it felt like he was patting a dog on the head for not running away while it was tied to a post. I started thinking back to my ex. That whole situationship had been a different kind of hell. That guy treated me like I was a character in a movie he was directing, a vessel for kinks that made me feel small and dirty. I spent so much time being used that when Leo came along and valued me, I mistook his obsession for respect. I thought because he wasn't asking me to do things I hated in the bedroom, it meant he was the one. But respect isn't just about what you don't do to someone. It's about seeing them as a whole person with their own needs and boundaries. Leo didn't see my boundaries because he was too busy leaning on me to keep himself upright. I remember one specific night, shortly after he got out of the hospital. We were on the phone, that second phone call I had been dreading. I was trying to be supportive, asking him about his meetings and how he was feeling. He sounded so hopeful, so full of life. But then he started talking about the future. He started talking about us meeting in person, about how he wanted to move closer to me so we could start our real life together. "You're the only reason I'm still here, babe," he whispered into the receiver. "I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have you to come home to, even if it's just through a screen." My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. I felt like I was being buried alive under a mountain of his gratitude. I wanted to scream, "Don't say that! Don't make me your reason for living! It's the ultimate burden. It's a form of emotional blackmail, even if it's unintentional. If I'm his reason for living, then I'm also the reason for his death if I choose to leave. How do you walk away from that? How do you say, 'I'm glad you're alive, but I don't want to talk to you anymore'?" I tried to pivot. I tried to make the conversation more about his strength, not my support. I told him, "Leo, you did this for you. You got sober for you. You should be proud of yourself." "But I did it for us," he insisted. "I wanted to be the man you deserve." And there it was, the nice guy trapdoor. He was becoming the man he thought I deserved, without ever asking me who I actually wanted. I found myself looking at his social media, seeing the photos he'd post about his journey, always with some caption about how his girl was his biggest supporter. My friends would see it and message me, saying how sweet it was, and how lucky I was to find someone so devoted. I'd just smile and send a heart emoji, while inside I felt like I was screaming in a soundproof room. The ick was growing into a physical revulsion. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way he would get passive-aggressive if I didn't reply within 20 minutes. The way he'd apologize over and over for things that didn't matter, fishing for me to tell him he was perfect. It was like he was constantly auditioning for the role of my boyfriend, and he was so desperate to get the part that he was overacting every single scene. He was trying too hard, and it was exhausting to watch. I'd find myself looking at my phone, seeing a message from him, and I'd just leave it there. I'd go to the gym, I'd cook dinner, I'd watch a movie, anything to avoid that blue light. And then, when I finally did reply, the guilt would hit me 10 times harder. I was gaslighting him by omission. I was letting him believe that everything was fine while I was mentally packing my bags and looking for the exit. But then I'd think about the alcohol. I'd think about the hospital. I'd think about the way he looked when he was at his lowest, lost, broken, and desperate. I didn't want to be the one to push him back into that darkness. I felt like a lifeguard who had pulled someone out of the ocean, only to realize I didn't want to take them home with me. So I was just standing there on the beach, holding their hand, while they thanked me for saving their life, wondering how the hell I was supposed to let go without them falling back into the waves. I felt so incredibly alone. I couldn't tell my friends because they thought he was a hero for getting sober. I couldn't tell my family because they were just happy I wasn't with the kink guy anymore. I was trapped in a prison of being the bigger person. I was 25 years old and I felt like my life was already over, signed away to a man I didn't even like because I was too afraid to be the villain in his story. I started to realize that the loyalty he was so proud of was actually just my inability to say no. I had spent so much of my life being a people pleaser, being the girl who didn't want to make a scene, that I had let myself become a character in someone else's drama. I was the supporting actress in the Leo Sobriety Hour, and I was expected to show up every day with a smile and a babe and a you can do it. But what about what I could do? What about my life? What about the fact that I didn't find him funny? What about the fact that we had nothing in common besides the fact that we were both lonely at the same time? I was suffocating, and the worst part was that the air was so sweet, it was making me sick. I knew I couldn't keep this up. I knew a breaking point was coming, but every time I opened my mouth to say it, the words died in my throat. Because how do you break the heart of a man who tells you that you're the reason he's still breathing? I felt like I was waiting for him to mess up. I was secretly hoping he'd do something bad, something I could use as a reason to leave. If he cheated, I'd be free. If he was mean to me, I'd be free. But he was just nice. He was perfect. And that was the cruelest part of all. He was giving me everything I thought I wanted, and it was exactly what was killing me. I was a bird in a golden cage, and the door was wide open, but I was too afraid of the storm outside to fly away. Or maybe I was just too afraid of the person who built the cage. Not because he was a monster, but because he was a victim. And in our society, you're allowed to leave a monster, but you're never supposed to leave a victim. The word loyal started to feel like a slur. Every time he used it, I felt this hot flash of resentment that I had to bury deep inside. He kept saying it over and over like a mantra. I'm so lucky you're loyal. Most women would have left, but you stayed. It wasn't a compliment to my character. It was a cage he was building around me. He was essentially telling me that my only value was my staying power, my willingness to endure his chaos and wait for him to come out the other side. But what he didn't realize, what I was too terrified to tell him, was that I wasn't staying out of love. I was staying out of a paralyzing fear of what would happen if I left. I started to look back at the timeline, trying to find where I had gone wrong. I had been so careful to tell him, right before things got really bad in February, that I was feeling more like a friend than a girlfriend. I thought I was being clear. I thought I was laying the groundwork for a soft exit. But then the hospital happened. Then the life and death stakes of his addiction took center stage, and my friendship talk was swallowed whole by his crisis. I wasn't being a loyal girlfriend. I was being a decent human being who didn't want to kick a man while he was down. But in his recovery-addled brain, there was no distinction. To him, kindness was the same as commitment. The ick was no longer just a minor annoyance. It was a physical barrier. I would look at his pictures, the same pictures I used to think were cute, and all I could see were the things that didn't vibe with me. I'd see the way he dressed, the way he styled his hair, and I'd feel that visceral shudder I mentioned before. It sounds shallow, I know. It sounds like I'm judging him for things that don't matter. But it wasn't just the clothes. It was the realization that we were fundamentally different people. He was someone who needed a savior, a constant North Star to keep him on the path. And I just wanted to be a 25-year-old woman who could laugh at a joke without having to explain why it was funny. I find myself sitting in my car after work, just staring at the dashboard, unwilling to go inside and check my phone. I knew what was waiting for me. A string of messages. A, thinking of you, babe. A, can't wait until we're finally together. A, you're the reason I stayed sober today. That last one was the worst. It's a form of emotional terrorism, whether he knows it or not. By making me his reason for sobriety, he was effectively making me the person who would be responsible if he relapsed. He was handing me the keys to his addiction and saying, "Don't let me crash." I started to feel like a monster. I'd read these beautiful, heart-wrenching messages about his struggle with alcohol, about the pain his parents had put him through, about how hard it was to grow up too fast, and I'd feel nothing. Or worse, I'd feel annoyed. I'd think, why are you telling me this? Why am I the one who has to carry this? And then the guilt would wash over me. How could I be so heartless? This man was baring his soul to me. He was being vulnerable. He was being nice. Why wasn't that enough for me? The truth is, I was still mourning the girl I was before the toxic situationship. I was still trying to find the me that wasn't defined by a man's needs. And here I was, right back in the same trap, just with a nicer hunter. My ex used me for his kinks. Leo was using me for his sobriety. Both of them were using me as a vessel to fill a void in themselves, and neither of them really cared about who I was. Leo loved the loyal version of me, the angel version. He didn't know the me that was angry, the me that was bored, the me that wanted to scream at the top of her lungs that I didn't care about his 2-month sobriety coin if it meant I had to spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone I wasn't. I remember one afternoon he sent me a voice note. He was talking about how he'd had a hard day at work, how someone had offered him a drink, and how he'd said no because he didn't want to let me down. I listened to his voice, the slight tremor in it, the desperate need for my approval, and I felt a wave of nausea. I didn't want that power. I never asked for it. I wanted to tell him, drink or don't drink, that's your choice, but don't put that on me. But instead I typed back, I'm so proud of you, Leo. You're so strong. I was a liar. A loyal, kind, perfect liar. The suffocation was becoming unbearable. I felt like I was living in a room with a low ceiling that was slowly sinking lower every single day. I couldn't talk to him about it because any hint of negativity might send him spiraling. That was the phrase that lived in my head, send him spiraling. It was the ultimate do not cross sign. I was terrified of his fragility. I was terrified that if I said, I don't think we're a good match, he'd go straight to the nearest bar and throw away everything he'd worked for. And then, in his mind, and probably in the minds of everyone who knew his story, it would be my fault. I'd be the girl who broke the sober man's heart. But how much longer could I keep this up? It had only been a day since we started talking again, and I was already at my breaking point. The expectations he had of me, the babes, the I love yous, the future talks, they were like weights being tied to my ankles. I felt like I was drowning in his gratitude. He held me in such high regard, literally putting me on a pedestal so high I couldn't even see the ground anymore. He loved me a month into our friendship. A month! I barely even knew his favourite colour back then. And he was already planning our wedding in his head. I realised then that this wasn't a relationship. It was a hostage situation where the hostage was also the guard. I was keeping myself trapped because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I was sacrificing my own happiness, my own mental health, and my own future to protect a man who was essentially a stranger I'd met on the internet. I was 25 years old, and I was letting my life be dictated by the fear of someone else's relapse. I needed a way out. I needed to break up, even though we weren't together. I needed to end the romance, to reclaim my status as just a friend. But I didn't know how to do it without causing a catastrophe. The timing was never going to be right. If I did it now, it was too soon after his hospital stay. If I waited, I was just leading him on. Every path led to a cliff, and I was the one standing on the edge, wondering if I should jump or wait for the wind to blow me off. The weight of a secret is a physical thing. It sits in your chest, heavy and cold, making every breath feel like a chore. And my secret was simple, yet devastating. I didn't love him. I didn't even really like him anymore. Every time I looked at my phone and saw his name, I felt a wave of repulsion so strong it made my stomach turn. But then I'd remember the hospital. I'd remember the shaky voice on the other end of the line telling me he was 2 months sober, and the secret would grow heavier, pressing down on my lungs until I felt like I was drowning in my own guilt. I started to realize that I was performing a role in a play I never signed up for. I was the supportive girlfriend. I was the anchor. I was the woman who had waited. But the truth was, I had only waited because I didn't have the heart to pull the trigger while he was in the ICU. I was essentially being rewarded for my indecision. He saw my silence as a vow of loyalty, when in reality it was just the silence of someone who had already checked out but didn't know where the exit was. I'd spend hours scrolling through our old messages, trying to find the spark I thought I'd felt in December. I'd look for that moment when I thought, yes, this is the guy. But looking back with clear eyes, I realized that the spark wasn't love. It was relief. It was the frantic, desperate relief of a woman who had just escaped a house fire and was hugging the first person she saw on the sidewalk. Leo wasn't my soulmate. He was just the person standing closest to me when I was at my most vulnerable. And because he was nice, because he didn't demand things from me that made me feel dirty, I convinced myself that he was enough. But nice is a baseline, not a destination. You wouldn't buy a car just because it had a steering wheel, and you shouldn't build a life with someone just because they aren't a monster. The ick started to manifest in ways I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just his jokes or his fashion sense anymore. It was the way he'd talk about us, as if we were this legendary romance that had survived the impossible. He'd say things like, "We've been through so much, babe. If we can get through this, we can get through anything." And I'd think, we haven't been through anything. You went through something. I just didn't block your number while it was happening. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending to be in love. It's a mental tax you pay on every interaction. You have to monitor your tone, your word choice, your response time. You have to make sure you sound happy enough, but not so happy that he thinks everything is perfect. Because deep down, you're still trying to find a way to break the news. But with Leo, there was no middle ground. He was either on top of the world because of me, or he was spiraling because of his life. There was no room for me to just be me. I remember sitting in my room, the sun setting outside, casting long orange shadows across the floor. I was staring at a photo he'd sent me of his 2-month sobriety coin. It was a beautiful thing, a symbol of immense hard work and a second chance at life. And all I could think was, I am tied to this coin. If I leave, I'm throwing this coin away for him. That's when the realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't his partner. I was his crutch. And if you've ever used a crutch, you know that the moment you can walk on your own, you throw the crutch in the back of the closet and never think about it again. But Leo didn't want to walk on his own. He wanted to lean on me forever. He had replaced one addiction with another. He had stopped drinking alcohol and started drinking me. My attention, my loyalty, my presence. That was his new drug. And like any addict, he was terrified of losing his supply. He literally told me he loved me a month into our friendship. A month! At 25, I should have known better. I should have seen that for the red flag it was. It wasn't love. It was a desperate attempt to lock me down before I realized who he actually was. It was a way of claiming ownership over my emotions before I had a chance to evaluate them. And because I was so broken from my ex, I let him do it. I let him put those golden handcuffs on me because they felt better than the iron ones my ex had used. But now the gold was flaking off and the metal underneath was just as cold. I felt so incredibly suffocated. It wasn't just his expectations. It was the expectations of the world. We live in a culture that romanticizes the woman who stays. We love the stories of the wives who stick by their husbands through addiction, the girlfriends who wait for their men to get out of prison, the loyal women who sacrifice everything for the sake of a man's potential. But nobody ever talks about the cost of that sacrifice. Nobody talks about the soul-crushing boredom of being with someone you don't connect with. Nobody talks about the ick that turns into resentment, or the way you start to hate yourself for being so kind. I was 25 years old. I should have been out meeting people, going on dates, finding someone who actually shared my sense of humor and my outlook on life. Instead, I was tethered to a screen, playing the role of a recovery coach for a man I didn't even want to kiss. I was wasting the best years of my life because I was afraid of a spiral. But then, a thought started to itch at the back of my mind. It was a dark thought, a selfish thought, but it was the first honest thing I'd felt in months. Is it really my job to keep him sober? If he's truly recovered, shouldn't his sobriety be based on his own strength, not on the presence of a girl he met on the internet? If his entire progress vanishes the moment I say, I'm not happy, then was he ever really sober to begin with? Or was he just performatively sober to keep me around? I realized that by staying, I wasn't helping him. I was enabling a different kind of sickness. I was letting him believe that a relationship could fix him. I was letting him believe that my loyalty was a substitute for his own self-worth. And as long as I kept playing along, he would never have to face the truth. That he needed to be okay with himself before he could ever be okay with someone else. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. I still had to figure out how to do it. How do you break up with a man who has nothing else? How do you tell him that the loyalty he prizes so much is actually just a mask for my own fear? I wanted to scream, but all I could do was type back, "That's great, Leo. I'm so happy for you." I was a prisoner of my own empathy, and the walls were closing in. I knew I couldn't stay. I knew I had to end the romance. But every time I looked at that sobriety coin, I felt like I was looking at a detonator. One wrong move, and everything would blow up. And I'd be the one left standing in the ruins. The silence of my room felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. But the silence from my phone was even louder. It had been 20 minutes since I'd replied to his last message, a gushing paragraph about how he was dedicating his 3rd month of sobriety to me. And I knew I just knew that he was staring at his screen, waiting. Every minute I didn't respond was a minute he spent questioning his worth, or worse, questioning my loyalty. It's a terrifying thing to realize that your silence has the power to destroy someone. It's even more terrifying to realize that you're starting to resent them for that very power. I found myself thinking back to the toxic situationship I'd escaped just before Leo. That guy, the one who used me, he was a monster in the traditional sense. He was loud, he was demanding, and he was clear about his selfishness. Leaving him was hard because I was trauma bonded, but it was easy to justify. I could point to his actions and say, this is why I'm going, but with the ick had fully transitioned into a state of permanent anxiety. You know that feeling when you're wearing a sweater that's just a little bit too tight and the wool is scratchy and you can't wait to take it off? That was my life. Every I love you from him was a fresh itch. Every time he called me babe, I felt a phantom weight on my shoulders. I started to analyze our conversations, looking for the source of the disconnect. I realized it was because he didn't actually talk to me. He talked at me. He'd tell me about his day, his struggles, his triumphs, and then he'd wait for me to validate them. It was a one-way street of emotional labor, and I was the only one doing the work. He'd send me these long, rambling voice notes about his childhood. He talked about how his parents were never there, how he had to be the adult in the house from the age of 10. He'd talk about the first time he picked up a bottle and how it made the world stop hurting. And as I listened, I'd feel this overwhelming sense of pity. But pity isn't love. Pity is what you feel for a wounded animal on the side of the road. You want to help it. You want it to get better, but you don't want to bring it into your bed and share your life with it. I started to feel like his sobriety was a performance put on for my benefit. Was he staying sober because he wanted a better life? Or was he staying sober because he thought it was the price of admission to keep me in his world? It's a dangerous distinction. If his sobriety was for him, it would survive a breakup. If it was for me, it was a house of cards waiting for a breeze. And I was the wind. I remember one night I tried to be brave. I typed out a message, something like, Leo, I'm so happy you're doing well, but I think we need to talk about where we stand. I feel like we've moved into a friendship space, and I want to be honest about that. I stared at the send button for 10 minutes. My thumb was hovering over the screen, trembling. But then, a notification popped up. It was a picture of him at a meeting, holding a new chip. The caption read, "Another day down. Couldn't have done it without my girl. You're my everything at MAME." I deleted my draft. I felt like a coward, but I also felt like a protector. How could I send that message now? It would be like stabbing a man while he was receiving a medal. So I sent a heart emoji instead. I sent a lie wrapped in a digital hug, and the cycle continued. I was 25, and I felt like I was 80. I felt like I was already a widow to a man who wasn't even dead. I was mourning my own youth, my own chances at a real connection, all because I didn't want to be the cause of someone else's pain. But the more I tried to protect him, the more I was hurting myself. I was becoming irritable, losing sleep, and withdrawing from my actual friends. They'd ask me how the guy was doing, and I'd just shrug and say, "He's fine, he's sober." I didn't want to tell them the truth, that I felt like a prisoner in a cell made of kindness. The online nature of our relationship made it even weirder. Because we weren't in the same physical space, he could imagine whatever he wanted about our connection. He didn't see the way I rolled my eyes when he made a bad joke. He didn't see the way I sighed when he called me for the 3rd time in a day. He only saw what I allowed him to see. He was in love with a ghost, a digital avatar of a woman who was loyal and sweet, and I was haunting my own life, waiting for a way to cross over into reality. I started to wonder if he was even actually nice, or if niceness was just his only survival strategy. When you have nothing else, no stability, no sobriety, no family, being the perfect, devoted boyfriend is a way to gain leverage. It makes you undumpable. It makes you a victim if the other person leaves. I felt manipulated, even though I knew he probably wasn't doing it on purpose. He was just a drowning man grabbing onto the nearest thing that floated. And I was tired of floating. I wanted to swim. I wanted to reach the shore and run. I found myself Googling things like how to break up with an alcoholic in recovery and is it my fault if my ex relapses? The internet told me what I already knew, that I wasn't responsible for his choices, that his sobriety was his own, that I had a right to be happy. But the internet doesn't have to deal with the babe texts. The internet doesn't have to see the face of a man who thinks you're his savior. I was suffocating. The expectations were so high and the room was so small. He loved me a month into our friendship, and here we were, months later, and I still didn't know if I even liked the sound of his laugh. I felt like I was living a double life. In one, I was the supportive, loyal girlfriend of a recovering hero. In the other, I was a young woman who was desperately bored, deeply icked out, and craving a life that was actually mine. I knew the end was coming. I could feel it in the way my heart pounded every time my phone buzzed. I could feel it in the way I was starting to hope he'd do something, anything, to give me a valid reason to leave. I was waiting for him to fail so I could be free. And that realization made me feel like the worst person in the world. I was rooting for his downfall just so I wouldn't have to be the one to tell the truth. How did I get here? How did I go from escaping a toxic man to being trapped by a nice one? I realized that the problem wasn't the men. It was me. It was my inability to say no before the stakes became life and death. It was my habit of prioritizing other people's comfort over my own survival. And if I didn't change that now, I'd be loyal all the way to my own emotional grave. The weight of a secret is a physical thing. It sits in your chest, heavy and cold, making every breath feel like a chore. And my secret was simple, yet devastating. I didn't love him. I didn't even really like him anymore. Every time I looked at my phone and saw his name, I felt a wave of repulsion so strong it made my stomach turn. But then I'd remember the hospital. I'd remember the shaky voice on the other end of the line, telling me he was 2 months sober, and the secret would grow heavier, pressing down on my lungs until I felt like I was drowning in my own guilt. I started to realize that I was performing a role in a play I never signed up for. I was the supportive girlfriend. I was the anchor. I was the woman who had waited. But the truth was, I had only waited because I didn't have the heart to pull the trigger while he was in the ICU. I was essentially being rewarded for my indecision. He saw my silence as a vow of loyalty, when in reality, it was just the silence of someone who had already checked out but didn't know where the exit was. I'd spent hours scrolling through our old messages, trying to find the spark I thought I'd felt in December. I'd look for that moment when I thought, yes, this is the guy. But looking back with clear eyes, I realized that the spark wasn't love. It was relief. It was the frantic, desperate relief of a woman who had just escaped a house fire and was hugging the first person she saw on the sidewalk. Leo wasn't my soulmate. He was just the person standing closest to me when I was at my most vulnerable. And because he was nice, because he didn't demand things from me that made me feel dirty, I convinced myself that he was enough. But nice is a baseline, not a destination. You wouldn't buy a car just because it had a steering wheel, and you shouldn't build a life with someone just because they aren't a monster. The ick started to manifest in ways I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just his jokes or his fashion sense anymore. It was the way he'd talk about us, as if we were this legendary romance that had survived the impossible. He'd say things like, "We've been through so much, babe. If we can get through this, we can get through anything. And I'd think, we haven't been through anything. You went through something. I just didn't block your number while it was happening. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending to be in love. It's a mental tax you pay on every interaction. You have to monitor your tone, your word choice, your response time. You have to make sure you sound happy enough, but not so happy that he thinks everything is perfect, because deep down, you're still trying to find a way to break the news. But with Leo, there was no middle ground. He was either on top of the world because of me, or he was spiraling because of his life. There was no room for me to just be me. I remember sitting in my room, the sun setting outside, casting long orange shadows across the floor. I was staring at a photo he'd sent me of his 2-month sobriety coin. It was a beautiful thing, a symbol of immense hard work and a second chance at life. And all I could think was, I am tied to this coin. If I leave, I'm throwing this coin away for him. That's when the realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't his partner. I was his crutch. And if you've ever used a crutch, you know that the moment you can walk on your own, you throw the crutch in the back of the closet and never think about it again. But Leo didn't want to walk on his own. He wanted to lean on me forever. He had replaced one addiction with another. He had stopped drinking alcohol and started drinking me. My attention, my loyalty, my presence, that was his new drug. And like any addict, he was terrified of losing his supply. He literally told me he loved me a month into our friendship. A month! At 25, I should have known better. I should have seen that for the red flag it was. It wasn't love. It was a desperate attempt to lock me down before I realized who he actually was. It was a way of claiming ownership over my emotions before I had a chance to evaluate them. And because I was so broken from my ex, I let him do it. I let him put those golden handcuffs on me because they felt better than the iron ones my ex had used. But now the gold was flaking off, and the metal underneath was just as cold. I felt so incredibly suffocated. It wasn't just his expectations. It was the expectations of the world. We live in a culture that romanticizes the woman who stays. We love the stories of the wives who stick by their husbands through addiction, the girlfriends who wait for their men to get out of prison, the loyal women who sacrifice everything for the sake of a man's potential. But nobody ever talks about the cost of that sacrifice. Nobody talks about the soul-crushing boredom of being with someone you don't connect with. Nobody talks about the ick that turns into resentment, or the way you start to hate yourself for being so kind. I was 25 years old. I should have been out meeting people, going on dates, finding someone who actually shared my sense of humor and my outlook on life. Instead, I was tethered to a screen, playing the role of a recovery coach for a man I didn't even want to kiss. I was wasting the best years of my life because I was afraid of a spiral. But then, a thought started to itch at the back of my mind. It was a dark thought, a selfish thought, but it was the first honest thing I'd felt in months. Is it really my job to keep him sober? If he's truly recovered, shouldn't his sobriety be based on his own strength, not on the presence of a girl he met on the internet? If his entire progress vanishes the moment I say, I'm not happy, then was he ever really sober to begin with? Or was he just performatively sober to keep me around? I realized that by staying, I wasn't helping him. I was enabling a different kind of sickness. I was letting him believe that a relationship could fix him. I was letting him believe that my loyalty was a substitute for his own self-worth. And as long as I kept playing along, he would never have to face the truth, that he needed to be okay with himself before he could ever be okay with someone else. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. I still had to figure out how to do it. How do you break up with a man who has nothing else? How do you tell him that the loyalty he prizes so much is actually just a mask for my own fear? I wanted to scream, but all I could do was type back, "That's great, Leo. I'm so happy for you." I was a prisoner of my own empathy, and the walls were closing in. I knew I couldn't stay. I knew I had to end the romance. But every time I looked at that sobriety coin, I felt like I was looking at a detonator. One wrong move and everything would blow up. And I'd be the one left standing in the ruins. The realization that I was essentially rooting for him to fail, just so I could be free, was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed. It was a cold, hard slap of reality. I wasn't being the good guy by staying. I was becoming a version of myself that I didn't recognize. Someone who was bitter, resentful, and secretly wishing for another person's downfall just to avoid an awkward conversation. I realized that by staying in this relationship, I was actually being more cruel to Leo than I would be by leaving. I was letting him build his new, sober life on a foundation of lies. I was letting him believe in a love that didn't exist, and eventually that lie was going to collapse. The only question was how much more of his life I was going to let him build on top of it before I pulled the rug out. I thought back to the very beginning, to that toxic situationship that had sent me running into Leo's arms in the first place. I realized that I had spent my entire adult life reacting to men instead of acting for myself. I stayed with the first guy because I was afraid of being alone, and I was staying with Leo because I was afraid of being the villain. But in both scenarios, I was the one losing. I was the one whose needs were being pushed to the side. I was 25 years old, and I was already living like my life belonged to everyone else but me. I decided that night that the right time was never going to come. There would never be a day where Leo was sober enough or strong enough for me to break his heart without feeling like a monster. If I waited for him to be perfectly stable, I'd be waiting forever. Life isn't stable. Sobriety isn't a destination, it's a journey with peaks and valleys. If I waited for a peak to tell him the truth, I'd just be knocking him off a higher ledge. I took a deep breath and opened our chat. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't want to do this over text, but with the distance and the nature of our relationship, a phone call felt like it would only lead to more of that dead air I dreaded. I needed to be clear, I needed to be firm, and most importantly, I needed to be honest. "Leo," I typed, "we need to talk. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I have to be honest with you because you deserve that. I am so incredibly proud of you and the work you've put into your sobriety. But I've realized that I can't be the person you need me to be right now. The romantic feelings I had at the beginning haven't grown, and I feel like we've moved into a place of friendship. I don't want to lead you on or let you believe something that isn't true. I care about you, but I can't be in a relationship with you." I stared at the message for a long time. My finger hovered over the send button. I thought about the hospital. I thought about the sobriety coin. I thought about the babe texts. And then I thought about myself. I thought about the girl who wanted to laugh at jokes she actually found funny. I thought about the woman who wanted to be wanted for who she was, not for her loyalty to someone else's crisis. I hit send. The minutes that followed were some of the longest of my life. I put my phone face down on the bed and walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I kept waiting for the phone to vibrate, waiting for the spiral to begin. I imagined him calling me, crying, telling me I was the only reason he was sober. I imagined him telling me he was going to the liquor store right then. I prepared myself for the guilt, for the onslaught of "how could you" messages from his friends or family. But then, my phone buzzed. Just once. I walked back to the bedroom, my heart in my mouth. I picked it up and read the message. "I understand," he wrote. "I think I knew, deep down. I just didn't want to admit it. Thank you for being honest with me. I'm going to focus on my meetings. I hope you find what you're looking for." I sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in months I could breathe. The ceiling didn't feel so low anymore. The ick was gone, replaced by a profound sense of relief, and a surprising amount of respect for him. He didn't spiral. He didn't blame me. He took the news like the man he was trying to become, a man who was sober for himself, not for a girl on the internet. It wasn't a cinematic ending. There were no grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It was just two people who had served a purpose in each other's lives for a season, finally letting go. He had given me the validation I needed after my toxic ex, and I had given him the support he needed to start his recovery. But the season was over. I'm still 25 and I'm still figuring things out. But I've learned that nice isn't a reason to stay, and guilt isn't a foundation for a relationship. I've learned that I am not responsible for anyone else's sobriety or happiness. That's a burden no one should have to carry. I'm finally single, truly single. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking for a distraction. I'm just looking for me. Sometimes being loyal means being loyal to yourself first. It's a hard lesson to learn, especially when you're a people pleaser, but it's the only way to actually live. I don't know what the future holds for Leo, but I know that he's on his own path now, and I'm on mine. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be. But I want to know what you think. Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship with a nice person just because you didn't want to be the villain? Have you ever felt like you were responsible for someone else's mental health or sobriety? It's a heavy weight to carry, and I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that subscribe button and sharing your thoughts below. It helps the channel grow and allows us to keep sharing these real, raw experiences. Thank you for listening.